Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Shrift Tactical. This is part 2 of our series on bugging out or bugging in. If you missed the first video, that was kind of worst case scenario. It was bugging out. What could you grab from your house in 15 minutes and wander off into the woods, as we put it?
So, absolutely.
Description or link for that one is down in the description. If you haven't seen that one, check it out. This is part 2. This is about bugging in. This is not a video about short-term things like a blizzard, your power went out for a couple of days, or flooding. Obviously, if you live in some high flood places where you're stranded and your power's out. If it's a week to 2 weeks, those are things that you probably should have thought through because you live in those areas and you have those processes already. This is a video about longer term events, whether that's 3 months, 6 months, 3 years, and then for who knows how long, right? But this is about planning out what those structures should look like. To be clear, none of us want this to happen. I've made it clear I like air conditioning and I like hot showers and all those different things, but I think it would be irresponsible of us as family men and Americans, quite frankly, to not take these things into consideration and set ourselves up for at least higher levels of success if one of these events does occur. If you're just tuning in and you're new to the whole SHTF conversation, I think this video is definitely for you. If you've been in this genre for a while, I still think you'll find some things that we talk about that maybe you didn't think about, or vice versa. We'll miss something that you've thought about, and please let us know in the comments so we can be better prepared ourselves and talk about it in a future video. Regardless, though, I think if you're starting out, something to bear in mind is just as you're watching videos like ours, as you're reading books like Prepared from Mike Glover or other things, start with lists and start working your way sequentially through it. You can't go out and buy everything at once unless you're wealthy. Then by all means, go for it.
Yeah. Spend some money.
Yeah, for sure. But I'm going to start with this. I'm going to talk about this a fair amount throughout the video. As you are planning for these different scenarios, I want you to think about systems. Systems, the first one is like a circle of security, right? So you have your own personal security, your family security, your property security, and then extending from there. The other thing to think about in terms of longevity is systems of sustainment. You want to have enough on hand to get you some time. You can get through the initial die-off if it's a really big event. And then that buys you some time to get other processes in place on your property. And we'll talk about some of those too as we go along. One other thing to kind of consider as from the 5,000 foot view is the event, the type of event will change your timeline on how much time you have to get your system set up and your situation ready to go, whether it's a financial collapse. That would cause, maybe it wouldn't disrupt the power grid initially, but it's going to cause a lot of frantic and panic behavior. Maybe it's the grid going down, whether it's in a region of the United States or in a larger area. Maybe it's the whole United States. I think a grid down would be.
Do you have medical needs? Are you dependent on electricity?
Yeah, exactly. And I think grid down, unfortunately, is becoming more and more common in conversation because our grid is so vulnerable. Some ones that are talked about a lot but happen less, or certainly there's not like a history case of them happening. EMP has happened at micro levels from like a coronal mass ejection and things like that, but that would be a really nasty one, of course, that you should think through. And then one that's really common in Hollywood but hasn't has happened once or twice in the history of the world, but would be like nuclear fallout and what that looks like for you depending on where you live. So we're going to cover a lot of these different topics broadly and not get into too much depth on any one. At the end of the day, though, whether you're new to this or whether you've been in the genre for 20 years like we have, or we're noobs and you've been in this genre for 50 years, I think we got some ideas that you can learn from. And as I said earlier, please drop some comments below about things that we potentially missed. The event definitely changes your timeline, and Eli's going to talk a little bit about how population is going to change your timeline.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to jump back and make a comment real quick. If you've given this any thought, you are miles ahead of the majority of the population. So you don't need to go crazy, building bunkers and spending your life savings on things. But I absolutely would recommend just, setting a small budget and chipping away at stuff. Obviously, food storage, all that stuff's good. We're going to talk about that. So initially, as Jared said, the event changes your timeline. Absolutely. Something more drastic. Do you live in a large metropolitan area where population is, insane, millions of people? Where do you live in that metropolitan area? Are you more centrally located? Are you on the outskirts? Personally, in my opinion, day one, I'm moving. If I'm in a large metropolitan area, I'm trying to find a family member that lives in a smaller town, get out of there.
No.
That'd be my thought. You know, obviously, you know, that may not be feasible for everybody. You know, other thoughts. Do you live in a little small Barney Fife town where everybody knows everybody? You know, their family, their friends, this and that. You know, that's going to be a different situation. Do you live out in a rural area? We have the benefit of living in a fairly small town. I mean, it's growing, but a lot of open space. I live up bordering national forest, so that's really good for me. I've got kind of one whole side I don't have to think too much about, and we can kind of see everything coming. You know, Jared lives down in town, but that being said, he's only 15 minutes away on you know, a little bit of a tough day to get here. So those are, you know, kind of the things that we think about. But again, you have to focus on your plan and what is around you. So yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to hop into a bunch of different chapters like we did the last time, cover what we think you might need, and talk about some different scenarios based on your situation, so stay tuned. Chapter 1, kind of looking at some of the common things you would think about, guns, some of the different self-defense thought processes, and ammunition, and how these things come into play. I think right off the bat, the most simple thing to say is, I talked earlier about circles of security. The number one thing you have to secure is your own person. I will never, in this situation, I would never be without a handgun. You know, whatever you have is what you should train with and what you should have on you at all times. Stepping out from there, you're going to be around your property doing basic property things, whether you're tending to a garden or getting water or whatever that might look like for you and where you're at. I don't ever want to be without like an arm's reach away from a long arm, right? For me, around here, we've talked about kind of, you guys have seen where we live on other videos. I mean, long viewpoints and things like that. I want something that's got a little bit of range to it. 5.56, I think for a lot of this would be totally fine. Something that's got some magnification so I can see a little bit further out, but we could easily be on the property doing what we're doing and needing to see or engage something at 400 or 500 yards. If you're in a much more dense area, whether it's the woods or something else, I think a shotgun might fill that role really nicely too. The cool thing about shotgun is all the different variations of ammo you can get for it. Stepping out from there, depending on what your situation looks like with your network and people around you, or if you just have a huge chunk of property that you want to defend the whole thing on. I'm not gonna lie though, if you've got 40 acres, I'm not sure it's worth trying to defend all 40.
It'll be difficult.
Yeah, but you know, I think it makes sense if this is a longer term situation. You want an LPOP somewhere out there. You want maybe a vantage point on a higher point where you have a bit more vision to see out. And then you're gonna want something with a little bit of range and obviously a scope on there, something that you're proficient with though. Without getting into all the details on that, I just think about your property and what means of defense do you have? A fence is great, it's overcomable, but having a fence matters. You know, how many places can a vehicle enter your property and how can you harden those spots? But I think having some concealed places that you could engage with fields of fire or obvious places of approach, and I'm no tactician, not at all, but I mean, I think anyone can look at their property and assume like, well, this is where traffic points could be and these are the places that we need to have covered, you know, for our own security and safety. 99% of the time though, you're not going to be in some firefight or some crazy defensive situation. You're just going to be trying to survive. And I think that's part of this conversation that gets a little left in the wash because it's not as fun or exhilarating to talk about, but you need to have a bunch of different types of ammo for the weapons that you have. I mean, obviously, I think first and foremost, ammo could become currency, whether that's some of the NATO calibers, obviously 22, some of the other ones, but 22 by itself might be one of the most valuable pieces of currency you could have in a situation like this because it's so functional. If you want to do something silently, you can have suppressors or you can have subsonic rounds. If you've ever shot a subsonic 22 out of a 22 rifle, it's still pretty darn quiet.
Especially bolt action.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I think having those pieces is really important, and then having different shotgun types for the different apparatuses or the different needs that you may have. And last but not least, it's not always about shooting at two-legged predators that mean you harm. You might have food wander across your property, and to be able to take it out silently, so not everyone's alerted that you're doing some shooting, would be valuable, whether that's an 8.6 suppressed or a 300 blackout suppressed. There's a lot of options out there, I would think.
Or even a bow, sorry.
Oh yeah, compound bow, absolutely. And even if you're not in some big rural area where you have all this space around you, if you're in a tighter area, but you still have, let's say you're on a half acre or even an acre, but you're surrounded by acre lots. Some of these are quiet enough that you could capture some food on your property or defend yourself or do something else without alerting the entire community that something has occurred. So I think those are all really important things to think through. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, you hit pretty much everything on the head there for the most part, and we're always going to miss things here, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't think about everything. I mean, or you can, you just forget about it sometimes. So
That's what the comment section is
yeah,
for.
absolutely. So, there's different things to think about. Potentially personal protection, body armor. Are you wearing it? When are you wearing it? Obviously, it adds a lot of weight. Are you wearing it around your property? If you're out and about, obviously, it's not a bad idea. I know that sparks a huge debate on when to wear body armor or have plates anyways versus just a carrier or a chest rig there. Again, more money, you're going to get better plates that are going to be lighter and still protect you. Those are all different things there. What other devices that may help you out? Do you have any kind of nods, maybe some thermal, and again, obviously extremely expensive for some high-end stuff. Even scratching the surface can get up there pricey, but however, on Amazon for sub $100 you can get some devices that work very well, and they're going to give you an advantage in the nighttime for sure. This Night Fox here, I've used it in new moon situations and actually very impressive, and I want to say at the time I paid $70 for it. Really wasn't that much money, so super cool. So other things to think about: securing your property. I mean, like Jared touched base on, I mean, do you have large property? Do you have areas for LPOPs and some things along those lines? Obviously you're only gonna be able to do so much. I mean, do you have a force behind you? Do you have a village that's going to be able to build barriers? I mean, there's that. I mean, that kind of goes into the networking thing.
Yep.
We'll touch base on that a little bit later. How large is your family? Do you got people that are going to be useful, or you got people that are not going to be useful? Jared's family's got young children, not overly that useful. Maybe help in the garden. At best. Things like that. Now, securing your property around, how does that look? How does it look for you? Are you in an apartment? I certainly wouldn't be hunkering down in an apartment in a large metropolitan area. I think it's just a ticking time bomb for failure. Are you in a home? Are you hunkering down in your home? Make sure your home is secured. Make sure people can't necessarily see what's going on in there, depending on how populated the area you are in. These are all going to change. Make sure you don't barricade yourself in your home where you can't get out. If someone wants in bad enough, they're probably going to get in. Are we defending again? Are we defending an acre, 5 acres, 40 acres? That's going to be a whole different ball game. More acreage, what can you do? I mean, do you got dogs? Dogs are good. Dogs can alert you to all kinds of things, but they also can make noise and alert you to a raccoon wandering through your property. Trip flashbangs, things like that. But at the same time, an animal could walk through depending on your property and alert you for no reason, or alert somebody else, as far as that goes. Do we have power? Do you have a generator? Solar? Motion sensor lights could be set up, cameras, things like that. Depending on the situation and how prepared you are, there could be a lot of things you really could do a good job, securing your property and being aware of what's going on. But obviously, the sky's potentially the limit, but all it takes is time, money, and effort with all of these things. And honestly, too much to even think about a lot of times. So,
it's such a big genre of the topic, and there's too many variables to really be pinpointed on it. But hopefully, just kind of going through all those things, you can stop, pause, write things down, and just be like, all right, this is what this would look like for me. Because again, we don't have all the answers. We can only do what we can do for around here.
And absolutely, it's easy to watch movies in Hollywood. I mean, Hollywood's hit on so many. I mean, whether you want to go down the zombie apocalypse, this, that, the other. All these scenarios, you can look at them and, within some reason, I think there's some validity to the craziness. Maybe not the zombie part. I don't know how realistic that is. But, the chaos that ensues and, feast or famine and survival, At the end of the day, we are all animals, and some people more than others. The next thing we're going to talk about is networking. Networking can be very, very beneficial. So a huge advantage. So do you have neighbors that think like you? Do you have friends that they're going to basically kind of regroup with you and they think like you? Do they have supplies that they're bringing to the table? Do they have skills they're bringing to the table? All these things are going to be helpful. Again, other thing to think about are these people going to be potential burdens? Let's say you like them, but they are not prepared and they don't have a lot to bring to the table. Do you take them in? Do you help them out? That's a tough question to really answer, okay? The other thing to think about is maybe you have some acquaintances or neighbors that are acquaintances. Are they a threat? Do you have to view them that way? That's another issue to consider, absolutely. But overall, bartering and networking can be huge. Let's just say you got a neighbor, maybe on the other side of the neighborhood. Let's say they're really good at huge hunters. They're going to come back with an elk, and let's say maybe you got a garden, trading, and that's going to be really beneficial along those lines. I mean, the other thing too, if you got networking, especially within a neighborhood, you guys can alternate security shifts, kind of just keeping a little bit of a larger area secure. Again, huge advantages, and basically having communications with your neighbors or your network, whether that be friends, close neighbors, which could be friends, technically, things like that. If everybody gets together, we got to have a way of communicating. And what's that look like, Jared?
Yeah, so to quote James Rawles's book Patriots, if you don't have comms, you don't have jack, right? But to talk about the networking piece for just a second, I've talked about these circles of security, right? And I think this is a crucial thing. If you don't know for sure that your close friends and or close neighbors or both are on the same page with you, you are exposing yourself to a threat, truthfully. This isn't a when we first met, this isn't a conversation we had first time we hung out or something like that. This is something that slowly unrolls because you've spent a lot of time, energy, and resources in preparing yourself, and you don't want to just open yourself up to anybody with that. So with that being said, I think you just really need to be focused on who you bring into this circle and vet them out really well. Now, before an emergency occurs, you have time to do that. After an emergency occurs, again, your timeline is greatly shortened, and you may need to rely on someone that you're not entirely sure that you can trust, and you're just going to have to hope for the best at that point. With that all said, you go to that next circle out. Maybe there's not people right in your immediate vicinity, but they're close enough that you can, it's a short walk to their location or things like that. And you can do some of the bartering that you talked about. And over a long period of time, when your community has kind of established itself, you may even push out further to other communities to see what kind of bartering things you could be looking at. In terms of communication, I'm kind of too many acronyms, right? But I think PACE plan is a pretty common one. So primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. And it would be great to say that you can have all of these completely vetted for your process. But I think the first thing to think about is for some of these events, your radio is still going to work. Obviously, if a nuclear explosion occurs and you live near that area, you may not have a lot going on radio-wise, but some of these other things that could occur, your little radio is still going to pick up signals, and it's still going to probably get you some immediate information. Obviously, you want to have a way to power that, whether it's rechargeable batteries or even the ones with got the little crank on it, right? But that's probably step one, because if you lose TV and you lose internet, you're now back to radio for information gathering. From there, I now look at how do we communicate with the people in our group? How do we communicate with that next outer circle? Baofeng radios are obviously a really popular option. They're low cost. If you get this larger battery pack, you can get a plug for the side that's USB, and therefore you can charge it with battery packs and things like that. So I have all of these set up. We've programmed them. We have some communications. I would say having a comms book is both frowned upon and important. And what I mean by comms book is, what are your call signs? What are your locations? What is you're going to switch to this frequency this time of day, and then you're going to switch to this frequency this time of day. NC Star makes a really good book on this. He just came out with a new book too about signal intelligence and things like that. I haven't even read it. It just came out. But you can go on Amazon, for example, and buy, I think it's the Gorilla's Guide to Baofeng Radios, I believe is what it's called, by NC Star. Really good information on this. Obviously, like we've said earlier, if you've got a bunch of money and you want to go buy some really fancy radios, by all means, you're going to have less people listening in, because obviously if you're using this, it's not encrypted. Anyone that's on your frequency can hear it, and that's why it's important to just not be very specific about locations, names, how many people are in your group. You don't want to give away any intelligence that you don't need to. This is probably step one in terms of communication if cell networks and things like that are down. There are satellite option devices, like a Garmin InReach, things like that. That's another possibility. I don't own any of that currently, so I'm not going to speak too much on it, but that's something to look into as well. The next step from there is something that I discovered a couple years ago, I guess, and that's this little guy. This is a Mesh-tastic. This is just one I bought on Etsy. This is one that came on Etsy, and I don't remember exactly what's in here, but the really cool thing about these Mesh-tastic devices, they connect Bluetooth to a phone or an iPad or a tablet, and then it's an encrypted connection. So it's 256-bit encryption, and you can send these to other ones that you've linked. So now you can have encrypted communication. It's not voice, it's text, but you can have encrypted communication with people amongst your group. And as long as you have a means of recharging a cell phone via a power bank or solar, you're going to be able to keep these things alive and use them for the foreseeable future.
So cell service is not necessary.
Cell service is not necessary. It's Bluetooth.
Just need that app.
Yep. So obviously something you'd have to do before it all hit the fan. But this is a really good backup situation. And then lastly, if you're in a larger environment or you have an LPOP or observation post or anything else, I guess that's what OP stands for, but other static locations on your property, an old-fashioned hardline might make sense too. I know there's surplus phones out there that you crank them up and you can have communications. I think things that are not interceptable are a great idea. I think having, again, that PACE plan of operation so that you can have fallback plans. And then last, but certainly not least, some sort of unit agreed upon hand signals. Obviously, if you have people in your group that did military service, you could use those. That also, though, could be seen by other people and they would know what you're doing. So at the end of the day, I think in your comms book or your comms plan would be some accepted hand signals amongst you and your close team.
Custom codes, you know, certain verbiage that means certain things, and it can be just basic speech,
I think to quote it again, if you don't have comms, you don't have jack. I think you need to be able to communicate across distances with people on properties or compounds. Or for a lot of you watching this, you live on a half acre or maybe less in a relatively, we'll call it a suburban area. You might have a few neighbors that you know and trust and a few others that you don't know at all. And you need to be able to communicate with the ones you know without getting intercepted by the ones that you don't. And I think some of these options are really great for some of that. So that's comms and that's networking. I think it's two really important pieces.
Absolutely.
Here.
And I mean, and the only other thing I'll add to the radio side is, and obviously as some radio nerd will probably tell you, I mean, knowing when to use the radio and knowing when not to use the radio. If you can pick up something, someone else can pick up your transmission. And certainly things to think about. All right, so we've touched base on some different armaments that could be used for hunting, protection. We've touched base on a little bit of armor, networking, securing your property, your compound, whatever that looks like. And this video's got a lot of information on it. So we're going to break it down into two different videos. As always, like and subscribe. We always appreciate you guys watching, and click on the next video, and we'll see you there.
Okay.